On this week's EchoDrops, we have Jo Stockdale. Jo, your work highlights creativity more than just art. It's a driver of resilience and brain development. How does creativity unlock potential, especially in young people?
I am actually a really enormous advocate for creativity in young people's lives, not just because it's a nice thing to do, but it is so much more than that. But I think as education systems have become more demanding and as technology and social media are increasingly encroaching the lives of young people, creativity is at risk of becoming less. And I also think that there is a misunderstanding about what we mean by creativity. Most of us, our brains go straight to another way of saying we're good at art or artistic is, are we creative or not? Lots of people wrongly assume that they aren't creative because they aren't artistic. And of course, you may be artistic and creative, but you can also be not artistic but still very creative. Because the misconception, I think, is that creativity is something that we do rather than a way of being. So from a young person's perspective, I think one of the first things to explore around creativity is that it's very often a way to express yourself and what is unique about you and what makes you different from any other human being on the planet. I think that is massively depleting in young people's lives. And this notion of them being able to value not just what they do and how good they are at what they do, but just who they are and what is their identity. I'm just thinking of things like schools. There tends to be one single measure of success. Just thinking from an education perspective, everybody's journeys are kind of mapped out and we want them all to be the same. But actually, that's not what the world needs at all. We need difference and variations and different ways of thinking and different ways of moving through the world. We need all that variation. It's all that kind of part of an ecosystem. So I think that's one of many reasons why our young people need more creativity in their life, is to just explore who they are and what their capability is. Another reason is because there is no right or wrong way to be creative. It's not driven by this is what failure looks like and this is what success looks like and this is what those steps should look like. This is how you become more creative, for example. And I think as long as we are aligning this idea of creativity with art, we'll get that kind of judgment. I'm not very creative. I think the more we can promote creativity in our young people's lives as a way of thinking, a way of looking at the world, the curiosity, and children are born with buckets of curiosity. They tend to stop being curious because the adult world tends to focus more on children, you should know the answers to the questions that I've decided are important, rather than children, you should be asking the questions. What are the questions that you have? What are the questions we may never be able to answer? That kind of open-endedness. The more we can promote that open-endedness, that creativity doesn't have a finish point. It doesn't have a right, now I'm creative, I can tick that off the list. It's an ongoing kind of journey. The more our children are creative and the more they have opportunities to be creative and to feel creative, the more it moves away from this idea of this is what you should be like, this is what your success looks like. Because from a child's perspective, every measure of success is pretty much determined by what an adult has decided is important, not what the child themselves have decided is important. If you give a bunch of crayons or art materials to a really young child, they're not interested in the product, what they're creating, until they learn from adults that that's what is important. They just are involved in the process. They just want to immerse themselves in the experience. The more creativity we can feed into their lives, the more opportunity there is for them to be interested in the process and not overly engaged in the end product and how good that is. And that's very, very good for resilience. I think the more we can work away from this idea of right and wrong, this is what success looks like, this is what the adults have decided is important for you, the more we widen their opportunity to, one, decide what is important to them for themselves, but also to explore different ways of being and doing and seeing and feeling their way through the world. So if an approach, for example, doesn't work, and I'm not just talking about a typically artistic approach, but if it's a curious curiosity-led approach, kind of experimental approach, a playful approach of a child just wanting to find out their own answer to their own question. Well, one approach doesn't work. It's creative thinking that allows them to identify, well, let's try it this way then. So at the heart of it is problem solving. And we often talk about the capacity to solve problems as really important, and it is, but we get lost in this idea of right or wrong answers. How many times do you have to get it wrong to solve the problem? Or how many problems do you have to identify along the way? Is what you thought was the problem at the beginning of this process actually really the problem that you need to solve? The more divergence and diversity there is in thinking, the more ways we can enable children to explore and experiment and get things wrong and be wrong and not know the answer and not even know the questions until they enter into a process of genuine creativity. That's when we can help children to really start unlocking their potential. The more we funnel them down this increasingly narrow road of this is what your success looks like, I'm the adult and I'm telling you that I've decided this is what you should be like. It really astounds me that there is so little flexibility in the adult world, given the world as we know it is moving so fast. The way that we had to respond to COVID, I know that was 5 years ago now, but the kind of big thought world leaders were very clear that the most creative minds were the best problem solvers because they weren't trying to fix this particular problem. Nobody had anticipated that problem was even going to arise. It was the creative minds in the world that were able to think divergently and start responding immediately to those problems. Following on from that, AI is overtaking every function that can be replaced in a human is being overtaken by AI. That tells me really that creativity, curiosity, and those deeply human qualities that will never be replaced by technology and machines, they are the ones that we need to be fostering and harnessing more in our young people now than ever. We can say, right, well, you need to be ready for the world of work. That's what the education system tells you, that this is the role of school. We don't know what the world of work is going to look like for today's children because the workforce isn't going to be the same. Everything is changing rapidly. So what we need is children who can adapt, flex, change direction and anticipate a future that isn't here yet. And all of that comes from creativity.